Let's take a look at the top 10 straight away. No surprise, Christian McCaffrey. He is number one, I think probably in a tier by himself at this point. And then you have familiar wide receiver superstar names, Tirico, CeeDee Lamb, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson. Breece Hall, RB2, and Bijan Robinson, RB3. We'll get into that. Your ride or die, Amon-Ra St. Brown, who I want to mention and go into a bit more depth. And then Kyron Williams and Jahmyr Gibbs, they round out the top 10. Was there any thought about having anyone but Christian McCaffrey at number one?
Yeah, you know what, honestly, like, I thought about it for a little bit just because, hey, you know, like he's like, I think 28 now, right? And he's had massive usage. He's been fairly healthy the last 2 years, but like, are you pushing your luck a little bit? And given you know, the point of number one isn't that they have to finish as the number one player in fantasy. The idea is that this is the player that is likely the safest, right? I mean, like I always say, you can't lose your league in the first round. You can't win your league in the first round. You can lose it. And so you need to nail that first round pick. You need high level production. And so who's kind of the safest guy that's going to give you high level production? Now we saw that last year with Justin Jefferson. Now, there's the argument for Justin Jefferson last year, and obviously that didn't happen because he ends up getting injured for a lot of the year. So I did have that thought process, like, am I pressing my luck with a running back here at number one? But ultimately, he's just too good because when he's right, when he is healthy, Chris McCaffrey is not only the best running back or best player in fantasy, he's the best player in fantasy by a pretty good margin, right, as well. I mean, he is somebody that he had 122 more points than any other running back through week 17 last year, averaging over 24 fantasy points per game. And so just that kind of production and getting that kind of the difference between him and number two is just such a massive advantage at a position that's tough in fantasy to begin with. To me, yeah, it's just, you know, the Niners return almost everyone. Yeah. The offense is back the same.
And just one more quick thing about him. You asked, may we be pushing our luck with him being that he's 28? Well, if you watch that Super Bowl he just played, they gave him 22 carries, another 7 or so receptions. So, and it wasn't like it took him 22 carries to get the 80 yards. So they're saying we're gonna give you the ball. We're gonna do it until it works. So that's their guy. And just based off of that last game, I don't see how it could be anybody else at number one besides CMC.
Yeah. 339 touches last year. That led all running backs. And there's kind of that rule of, you know, hey, you know, running backs coming off that kind of workload. But the other thing, Jay, is like the guy missed almost 2 full years. Like he's not as workhorse heavy as some other running backs at his age because he literally did miss almost 2 years of work. Does that make any sense? Like there's not as much tread on the tire.
Definitely makes sense.
Yeah. Also, not like he was adding playoff games in Carolina most of those years too. I think the good thing with McCaffrey is that his running back value isn't nearly as tied to his offensive line play as others are. Like we saw that Tennessee's offensive line just completely tanked Derrick Henry for stretches of the season. That's not going to happen with McCaffrey because of his value as a receiver and also just because of the spacing that passing offense provides him as well. I think the red flags are, one, he's just a running back. There's just more attrition there. 2, he's a little dependent on these big runs early in the season. And then 3, I don't think he's going to be scoring touchdowns every single game like he was for a stretch. But at the same time, even with those demerits, I still think he is clearly
he may
the number
not
one
need
guy.
it.
He has some crazy stat, and my guy Ian Hartitz always puts this out every game, but like he's had like 100 yards or a touchdown in like every single game for like 4 straight years or something like that. It's like some sort of crazy stat like that, and I don't have it exactly, and maybe someone can find it for me and get into my ear about it. But anyway, it's a bunch of numbers that tell you what you already know. Chris McCaffrey is just an awesome human being when it comes to fantasy football. He's a stud. I've never met him in person. I'm sure he's lovely as well as a human being.
Yeah.
But just
odds on to be lovely.
Fantasy football wise, I've interviewed him, but just over Zoom. I've never met him in person. But he was lovely on the interview, and he puts up massive fantasy points. He's the number one. I think he will be. I haven't looked around the industry, but I would be shocked if he is not the consensus number one across the fantasy football industry.
Yeah, I think he has to be. All right, let's talk about some of these wide receivers, focusing in on CeeDee Lamb, who's number 3. What was the thought process, Matthew, in putting CeeDee ahead of Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson?
My guy Eights, I call him Eights. His friends call him Eights.
Correct.
Well, first off, he was the number 1 wide receiver in fantasy last year, right? I mean, so you could make an argument that he should be even ahead of Tyreek Hill. 135 receptions, basically a 30% target share. and you look at what the Dallas offense has done this offseason, and the answer is nothing. Right? I mean, like they let Michael Gallup go. They let Tony Pollard go. We'll see what happens in the draft, but if anything, there's less competition for CeeDee Lamb, who had this 30% target share last year, than there was, going into last year. So it feels like to me that, he's going to continue to be a massive focal point for Dak Prescott and Mike McCarthy on this offense. He's young and he's been pretty injury free. Like, again, he had that massive second half. If there's one small thing that you want to nitpick on, like it took him a while fantasy wise at the beginning of the year because he wasn't scoring touchdowns and that kind of stuff. But anyway, so to me, I think given the concerns on, and again, at this level you sort of have to really nitpick, right? But given the fact that Jamar Chase, we don't know what Burrow's going to look like, right? And at the moment, T. Higgins is there, Justin Jefferson, who knows with the quarterback situation there. So for me, again, if I'm going to draft with you and you take Jamar Chase over CeeDee Lamb, I'm not looking at you weird. I totally get it, right? But like, I think there are less question marks. They're all superstars, but at this level, you have to nitpick. There are less question marks about CeeDee Lamb than there are a couple of the guys behind him. Yeah, and again, the question marks are this small, but
yeah, and what fantasy managers should understand too is when you get to ranking these top 5 to 10 guys at these positions, they're all going to be closer to the same thing. Matthew, I did a 3-round mock draft in January, and
Bragger.
Yeah, just a little something. I also had CeeDee Lamb coming off the board as the second wide receiver. But again, if you take Jamar Chase or you take Justin Jefferson, if you think his talent will outshine whatever quarterback they end up with, if it's not Sam Darnold, like, we not mad at you for that. If they're ranked 2, 3, 4, it's all the same, type of talent level. With that being said, I just want to go back real quick to the running backs. You mentioned Christian McCaffrey scoring 122 more fantasy points than all other running backs.
Yes, sir.
Through week 17. The guy second on that list was Breece Hall.
Yep.
And that's a guy I think we like a lot coming into this season as well. Like, he's another guy, ended the season well, at least 26 fantasy points in 4 of his last 5 games, including that 43-point outburst in the fantasy playoffs. They haven't and they won't add anybody of significance behind him in that room. So getting Aaron Rodgers back, now they got Mike Williams. It's looking like a regular offense now. So we saw what he was able to do with whatever they was doing on offense this past season. I think he's one of the guys that, along with Kyron Williams, who could challenge CMC for that RB1 spot.
Yep, Breece Hall. And I think the good thing with him is just the workload he got at the end of the season. What did he get, 37 carries against the Patriots or something in the final game? Like, his knee is all the way back. And to your point, Lawrence, he's going to play in a real offense this year with a quarterback who can actually relieve the 8-man boxes that he'd otherwise be seeing. He's 30-1 to an Offensive Player of the Year, which I think is too big. You always defer to a guy who's in New York as well. If Breece Hall is the most deserving candidate, he will win that award because he plays in New York. He'll get all the attention. So I think Breece...
and he will have a better offense. In addition to having just a better offense around him, specifically, he'll have a better offensive line. I mean, again, like, he was facing 8-man boxes behind one of the worst offensive lines in football and, getting these but still massive workload and being able to produce. So another year removed from the injury, we expect hopefully Rodgers to be healthy. Adding Mike Williams, to your point, better offensive line. Yep. He should have a monster year again. He's my number 2 wide receiver.
Just
number
quickly
2 running back, I'm sorry.
Just going back quickly to CeeDee versus Jamar Chase, I think what people sometimes don't just feel enough is the fact that, like, one of these guys plays in a dome and the other guy plays outdoors in cold climates. Like, it's a massive shift that Dallas plays in a dome, and also that CeeDee Lamb plays in the NFC East against an Eagles defense that really struggled last year. Commanders, Giants defenses aren't terrifying. Nope. Meanwhile, Jamar Chase has got to play 6 games against the Baltimore, Cleveland, and Pittsburgh defenses. They all project as top 10 defenses, and it's cold. It's cold in all those cities. So I think that hurts. Also, Joe Burrow, I think he'll probably enter the season fine. He's just a more injury-prone player than Dak Prescott because he gets sacked so much more, and he's got to go up against those pass rushers in that division. So that's why I'd have CeeDee over Jamar as well. Let's talk about Kyren Williams, Lawrence. What are your expectations for him after breakout player of the year? Arguably, he's number 9 in Matthews' rankings, sandwiched in between 2 Detroit Lions, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jahmyr Gibbs. What are your expectations for Kyren?
And I have Bijan ahead of him, so he's my number 4 running back, number 9 overall. Lawrence, is that where you have him? You have him higher, lower? Where are you at Kyren? Where are you with Kyren this year?
Yeah, like I was saying just a minute ago, I have him at running back 2. Okay. Again, because I got Breece Hall at 3, Bijan at 5. Again, the Rams, they didn't add anybody in free agency of significance. They still got the same guys behind them, Zach Evans, Ronnie Rivers. I don't think anybody's in the draft that's going to come and take his spot, and they're using this guy like they did Todd Gurley a few years back. Like, it took 1 week of Cam Akers getting 22 carries for 29 yards for him to say, all right, we need to make a move. We need to let this young guy do his thing. And if he didn't miss those 4.5 games, he was going to lead the league in rushing. He still ended up as a top running back in fantasy football despite that. So it was worth keeping him on your redraft rosters into the playoffs because he showed out then too. But I think Sean McVay believes in this guy. That was clear all the way throughout the playoffs. So I expect him, Christian McCaffrey, Breece Hall, Bijan Robinson, all of those guys to be right there.
We're in a league where there aren't that many workhorse running backs, and it's super weird when you look at Kyren Williams. You're like, well, that guy's not built like a workhorse running back, but in theory, neither is Christian McCaffrey. We talked a little bit earlier, Christian McCaffrey, 339 touches, led all NFL running backs. Okay, that works out to 21.2 touches per game. Kyren Williams averaged 21.7 touches per game. He actually averaged more touches per game. It's half of a touch, but whatever. He averaged more touches per game than Christian McCaffrey, but you mentioned it. The total numbers aren't there because of the 4.5 missed games, but he gets such massive workload. They improved their offensive line this offseason, the Rams did, adding the 2 guards as well. And so to your point, like, Zach Evans couldn't even get on the field last year.
Right.
Like, like when he went down, they were like, oh, hey, Royce Freeman.
They brought back Darrell Henderson for a couple weeks.
Like, they have no, Ronnie Rivers, great.
Solid backup.
Yeah.
Give him a breather sometime.
Exactly. Yeah. But, he's the lead running back getting a massive workload on one of the better offenses in the NFL. And so, he comes in at number 9. He's running back 4.
This begs the question, if we're in that first round, and then we'll talk about the other running backs in your 11 through 20. What do you feel about making sure you get, could you see fantasy drafts going on these running back runs, knowing, because we'll go into drafts knowing which running backs are the ones who are going to get those 20 touches per game. So could you see guys like Jamar Chase fall back a little bit, for those running backs that we know can get those 18 to 22 touches?
I think the opposite will happen. I think because last year one of my big draft strategies was just basically, like, we talked about this in the preseason the entire time, Lawrence, and you were with me, Jay, you and Connor. We all talked about this. We're just basically, in that the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th round, there were all these guys that were going to get what we called cheap volume, right? And now we thought it was going to be Cam Akers, not Kyren Williams, but we talked about the James Connors of the world, that guys like that just sort of that we're going to get, kind of this David Montgomery was another one that was kind of the poster child.
James Cook.
Yeah, James Cook. We're just like, no, I know you don't like it and you're worried about it, but these are guys that are going to get, you're going to be able to get cheap volume, 15 touches a game out of these guys that you can draft in the 6th round. And I think that's going to be the same case again this year. There will be guys again, you see Gibbs. I have Gibbs higher. But, it's not like David Montgomery's not going to score double-digit touchdowns this year. You know what I mean? James Conner, once again, will have, we're going to get there, but I'm with Arthur Smith in Pittsburgh. I'm actually back in on Najee and Jalen Warren.
Yes.
Because no one's going to like them. Where they're going to be drafted is going to be so low, and those guys are both going to touch the ball 15 times a game. Yeah. They're not going to let Russ throw it. And, so my point is I think there are I think what will happen is because of last year, because there was such success of, non-big name running backs, that I think you will Gus Edwards is another guy that's going to go way too low in
see,
drafts.
my thinking was, will that switch? No,
See,
I'm saying
I'm saying people
people
go
trying
more-
to find that receiver instead.
No,
but
I
it's
think they
harder
go-
to do that.
I think it will be a lot of zero RB. That will be a even more popular draft strategy. Again, we got a long way to go till August, but I just feel like that's going to be. People are going to want to go wide. You'll be more likely to see in drafts people go wide receiver than running back, which used to be the norm.
Yep.
Yeah.
Before we move out of the top 10, just quickly, Matthew, your ride or die, Amon-Ra St. Brown. Just a quick note on him. He plays 14 games in domes next season, which is huge and really important. Also, just love with Amon-Ra, just for his floor, the fact that he plays in the slot so much, I just think is so key, where he's got that Cooper Kupp, Michael Thomas thing where, okay, well, if Sauce Gardner or L'Jarius Sneed is at whatever, you just move him around. You can get off of the harder matchups because he is so versatile. And I just think that with playing so many games in domes, he's not going to have these Jamar Chase games in like frigid conditions in Baltimore or whatever.
Well, by the way, not only is he playing a bunch of games in domes, but you know who else is playing a bunch of games in domes is Jared Goff.
Yeah.
And that's the whole thing. Like Jared Goff in a dome
Love
is
it.
great. And so when Jared Goff has time and is in a dome, he's as good as any quarterback in the NFL. I'm not saying he's Mahomes, but I'm just saying, like, for our purposes, can he get the ball to Amon-Ra St. Brown? Can he get the ball to Sam Laporta? Can he lead drives down to get them in scoring position? And the answer is yes.
Yes, he
Jared Goff is an above-average quarterback, and I would argue he is borderline elite when he is indoors and the offensive line has given him time to block. Again, that was one of the brilliance of the Detroit Lions postseason run, and they should have beaten the Niners, is their protections. They were, I was talking with like Jason Garrett and Deb McCourty, and they were talking to me about how brilliant Dan Campbell and Ben Johnson were in terms of how they adjusted the protection of the offensive line. Like they constantly were doing different protections to keep Jared Goff in a clean pocket. And so those two in 14 dome games, pretty awesome. By the way, their division got weaker. I mean, I think the Bears will be slightly better, but the Vikings slightly
Packers will
worse.
be good, but
Packers will be good, but anyway.
they should be leading.
I mean,
they just run a ton of plays as well, even with how much they run the ball. I think Jared Goff was second in the league in pass attempts. Like they just have the ball a lot because they are so good at staying on the field.
And for St. Brown being in that slot a lot, that also leads to, the slot guy oftentimes is the first read. That's oftentimes the guy that you scheme to get open, which we know that's what they do for Amon-Ra St. Brown.
They also lost Josh Reynolds. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And not that Josh Reynolds is, but like that's a guy that was getting,
He was
6 targets a game, right? Josh Reynolds no longer there. Sam Laporta coming off of a major injury. We'll see how, is he there does he start the season on the pup, or is even if he's not, is he slow, like kind of stuff. I know he limped through the playoffs and everything like that, but so we'll see. We'll see on Laporta, but that's my point, right? Is just Amon-Ra is the focal point of that offense.
Well, what about Donovan Peoples-Jones in this offense? How you feel about that?
Is he on the Lions?
Yeah,
right.
Hey, it's Matthew Berry from NBCSports.com and RotoWorld.com, and I want to thank you so much for watching whatever it is you just watched, or if nothing else, being too lazy to click out of the autoplay after this video started, after whatever it is you actually wanted to watch finished. But now that you're here, I'd like to take a moment here to ask you respectfully now, okay? I'm asking you respectfully to subscribe to the NFL on NBC YouTube channel. You'll get the latest RotoWorld fantasy news headlines, all sorts of great shows, including my own Fantasy Football Happy Hour. So go subscribe now. Again, I'm asking respectfully.